yeah, my name is Sam Orndorff. I got my master's degree here at San Diego State. I'm currently a geography PhD student, and I actually got my bachelor's degree at Ohio State, also from Ohio. And my bachelor's was in international studies with a focus in economic development. So there's a little bit of that element in my research here. What I studied was a hydroelectric dam that was planned to be built on indigenous lands. So Tom had talked about indigenous lands, obviously historically, but my project is a very contemporary, so present day phenomenon. And how many people have ever seen a hydroelectric dam? Just type in the chat. I'm really curious, actually. All right, my chat's not popping up. So if you've ever seen a hydroelectric dam, they can be really large. They're built on rivers. And what they do is they stop the flow of water, and they basically regulate it. And the water comes flying down this giant wall of concrete. It turns a turbine, and it creates hydroelectric power or electricity. So what they do obviously has a really large impact on water and land. And it affects not just the animals that live there, so the non-human beings, but of course human beings are greatly affected. This picture that I have here is from the Three Gorges Dam in China. So like the name says, it filled up 3 gorges. It's the largest dam that's ever been built. Took several years. And a lot of people had to leave this riparian area, which is basically a fancy name for the sides of the river. Now, can anybody guess what some of the other impacts of building a hydroelectric dam would be? Take a second to think about it. Like, besides human beings having to leave the area where the flow of water stops and a big area gets flooded, fish are one of the main things that gets affected, obviously, and any aquatic species is going to have some kind of impact. And they're often thought of as being sort of, you know, green electricity, like as opposed to burning coal or burning oil. Well, we can just build hydroelectric dams and we'll create power that way. Oh, and guess what else? We'll also get this big flow of water. We'll get this big source of water that we can send to cities where people live so they have fresh water. So all of that's really great, but the question is, who's going to suffer when this whole area around a river gets flooded? So if you've ever been to the Hoover Dam, which is close to Las Vegas, it's about 700 feet tall, over 700 feet tall. And it's this massive power of what the government can do out on the landscape, right? So not only does it have this practical solution of creating electric power, it also opens up a lake that didn't used to be there, a human-made lake. But it also has this symbolic power, right? And they're hotly contested hydroelectric dams. So a lot of Native American groups and a lot of indigenous groups in Canada and in Mexico, as well as really the whole world, their lands are some of the first lands that get exploited. The rivers that they use every day to get food, to clean their clothes, just to drink water, you know, water their crops. Those are some of the first rivers where hydroelectric dams were built. So there's this strong connection between Native or indigenous peoples losing their lands and hydroelectric dams. And it goes back a couple hundred years. So what I wanted to research was this group, the Nayarit people. They live pretty much this whole area in the Mexican state of Nayarit. There's about 20,000 people who speak that language, has different dialects. So what I had to do for this project was really figure out how are these Nayarit people, how are the activists, the lawyers, people who know about law, environmentalists, how are they working together to stop this hydroelectric dam project? So this is a really biodiverse area. And what that means is there's a lot of different species And even within the species, there's a high genetic gene pool diversity. So they can go ahead and survive for a long time. There's actually jaguars that live here, ocelots. In the bottom right, you'll see those. I'm actually curious, does anybody know what these things are here in the water? So that's the river, the San Pedro Mezquital River, where it starts to meet the ocean, creates this big wetland, this big, basically, swampy area. Does anybody have a guess what those might be? Boats. Well, kind of. They float, right? Yeah, pens for raising fish. Good job. It's actually oyster farms. So if they had built this dam that they planned to build, the flow of water would be greatly, greatly reduced, right? It would be a trickle. This whole area would dry up, and anybody who's trying to fish there, is going to lose their way of life. There's a lot at stake here. I'm starting to go over my time, but you could probably start to see, at least based on the way I'm telling the story, that it's not really a fair situation. You know, there are people who have been historically neglected or marginalized, and they don't have as much freedom to work in any kind of field that they want to. There's even sort of casual racism and discrimination in Mexico today. So it is an unfair situation, so it's what we call environmental justice issue. And because of that, people had to work together in a very tense situation also, because there are other cases where people will oppose the dam. They might hold protests, they might try to talk to their government officials to stop it from happening. And some of them actually might get killed. So you can see someone who that happened to. But the point is that there are laws on the books that say you can't just ignore indigenous people and just do whatever you want on their land and pollute and cut down all their forests and mine all the minerals on their land. So there are several laws. There's basically a group in the UN that's worked for a long time trying to get this law that says you have to get permission if you're going to build this giant electric dam, or if you're going to build a wind farm, if you're going to mine, or you're going to cut down the forest for timber. You have to get permission. You can't just stump on in, do whatever you want and leave. But unfortunately, in Mexico and a lot of other countries, that's not really a right unless it's enforced. So that's one of the things I had to study. So a social movement started to happen after the dam was introduced. Fortunately, they in 2019, right before I started to do my research there in Mexico, the dam was actually canceled because a judge said that this went through without permission, without consent. One of the things that also starts to happen when people come together and talk about their environment is different ethnic groups, people who speak different languages, people from the city, people from the countryside. They all come together and share ideas and learn from other people, not just in Mexico, but around Latin America and the world. So this sacred area that really lines the river, you can see here, people make, I guess pilgrimage is the best word for it. This is, I think that's Saicota, or Kayatzita is actually the name of that place. So you can see some, at the bottom left, some Huidarica people, who are just cousins or sort of relatives of the Nayarit people. So what I did to figure out my answers was just talk to people in different organizations, environmental lawyers, activists. There was a teacher who I spoke to a long time. It's pretty hard to actually turn all of your research after you take hours upon hours talking to people, hearing their stories, making contacts. You have to turn that into writing. That's a pretty tricky process. But I was able to find out that there's a new culture around environmental rights that's developing, and there's a lot of new linkages that are happening across time and place. Here's a few more pictures. So this community, this is actually the bridge between where I took this photo is the more mestizo or just Mexican neighborhood called San Pedro Izcatan. And then across the river is Presidio de los Reyes, which is almost 100% Nayarit. So there's a lot of difference. It's kind of the other side of the tracks, if you ever heard that expression. That's one of the tributaries of the main river. If you can read Spanish, you know what that says already, but there are murals all over. This one says you have the right to choose your gender. So I took 2 trips there, once in the dry season, which you can see on the left side, and once in the rainy season. And this is a subtropical climate. Hopefully Corey talks about that. And it experiences a really wet time of year and a dry time of year. This rock formation is a sacred rock formation called La Busatena, which I actually wrote an article about, and it's free if you want to check it out. I'll get to that last. So my final point is that we're constantly expanding our projects to get more electric power, and it's going to continue to have an impact. Everything that we do has an impact, whether it's solar panels. They require minerals to be mined out of the earth and hammered out into a flat panel. Whether it's a dam or whether it's any other type of energy, it's going to have an impact. So final thoughts, yeah, you can check out that article. There's a link there. I will share my slides, a link to this actual presentation. The last thing I want to say, can you see this landmark map? Hopefully it'll take a second. So that's a good, this is the nativeland.ca is more historical, whereas landmarkmap.org contains a lot of new information. So this is one of those really helpful maps that I looked at that tells you communally held lands and indigenous lands. Last resource I have is this Environmental Justice Atlas, or ejatlas.org, which has all kinds of different development projects, farming, timber, all kinds of things, that those big impactful things that happen on the landscape. It gives you a good overview of all of that.
That was awesome, Sam. Thanks. That's a lot of information to pack in, and thank you for sharing that research project. It would have been easy to say that's too much to fit in, but that was really cool to see how you approach the research problem and what it was like to actually go and do the work in the field. So very cool. And